The first tear slid down her cheek before she realized she had stopped pretending to breathe, and in that quiet booth by the fogged window of a roadside diner in western Pennsylvania, grief arrived like an uninvited storm that finally found the door unlocked. What would you do if the weight you carried had nowhere left to rest, if strangers became the only witnesses to your breaking? Would you hide, or would you let the world see the crack in your heart that no one ever taught you how to mend? Her name was Sarah Whitman, a school secretary from a town that once thrived on steel and now survived on memory. She sat alone with her hands folded too tightly in her lap, staring at the rain tracing thin, trembling lines across the glass, as if the sky itself had forgotten how to hold together. 2 weeks earlier she had buried her husband, Thomas, after a long winter of hospital hallways and whispered prayers that never seemed to reach heaven. The funeral had ended, the casseroles had stopped coming, the sympathy cards had been stacked into a drawer she could no longer open, and suddenly the world expected her to know how to live again. But every corner of her small rented house still spoke his name, every chair still remembered his shape, and every morning arrived like an accusation asking why she was still here when he was not. She had driven without knowing where she was going, letting the highway choose for her, until hunger and exhaustion guided her into that diner with red vinyl seats and the smell of coffee that had been brewing too long. She ordered nothing she would eat and sat there watching families come and go, wondering when her own life had turned into a room with the lights left on but no one home. And then, without warning, the sob rose up, silent and violent, shaking her shoulders while she tried to hide behind her coat in the corner booth, hoping no one would notice the woman unraveling between lunch specials. Across from her, a small family had taken the last open table. The father, Michael Turner, wore the tired look of a man who worked with his hands and never quite got the grease out from under his nails. His wife, Hannah, leaned toward their young son with the kind of patience learned through years of scraped knees and bedtime fears. The boy, Jacob, was no older than 4, clutching a worn teddy bear with one ear missing and eyes that seemed too observant for someone so small. He noticed the woman long before the adults did, noticed the way her shoulders shook and the way her face folded inward like paper being crushed. Children have a way of seeing what grown people spend their lives trying not to see. Jacob slipped from his seat, dragging the teddy behind him, and wandered over with the solemn confidence of someone carrying a mission he did not yet understand. He stood beside Sarah's booth, looking up at her with wide, searching eyes, and in a voice soft but certain, he told her that she should not cry, because his daddy fixed broken things. The words were simple, unpolished, offered without any idea of how deep they might land, yet they struck her with the force of a hand on her back just as she was about to fall. She looked at him, really looked, at the smudge of syrup on his sleeve, at the bear missing its ear, at the quiet hope in his expression, and something inside her cracked open. The tears came harder then, not only from sorrow but from the sudden, aching reminder that once, long ago, she had believed in fixing, in healing, in the idea that love could repair what life shattered. She had forgotten that children still believed it. Michael rose from his seat, embarrassed and apologetic, reaching to retrieve his son, but Sarah lifted a trembling hand to stop him. She nodded, unable to speak, and placed her palm gently over Jacob's small fingers, feeling the warmth and certainty there. For the first time since the hospital room went silent, she did not feel entirely alone. Michael explained, in the awkward way of men and used to emotional terrain, that he repaired appliances for a living, that his boy thought every broken thing could be made right with enough tools and patience. Sarah listened, wiping her face, and wondered when she had lost that faith. Had she ever truly believed that broken hearts could be fixed, or had she simply hoped they might? They invited her to join them, and though every instinct told her to decline, something in her was tired of saying no to life. She slid out of her booth and into theirs, accepting coffee she would not finish and conversation she barely followed, yet the presence of that ordinary family wrapped around her like a borrowed blanket. Hannah spoke of grocery lists and kindergarten worries, Michael of leaky pipes and long drives, Jacob of superheroes and bears who never left your side. And in their small, unremarkable stories, Sarah found herself breathing again. When they parted, the rain had softened to a mist, and Michael scribbled the name of his repair shop on a napkin, telling her that sometimes fixing meant more than tools. She thanked them, though no words felt large enough, and watched as they disappeared into the gray afternoon, a family carrying on without knowing the quiet miracle they had performed. In the days that followed, Sarah returned to her empty house with a different weight in her chest, still heavy but no longer hollow. She remembered Thomas teaching her how to change a tire, laughing when she dropped the wrench, promising that together they could handle anything. She remembered the way he used to say that nothing worth loving stayed unbroken, that cracks were just places where light learned how to enter. Perhaps she had not lost everything. Perhaps some pieces of her were still waiting to be found. Weeks later, when the sink began to leak and she realized she had no idea how to stop it, she pulled the napkin from her purse and called the number written there. Michael arrived with his toolbox and quiet competence, kneeling beneath her cabinet while she made awkward conversation about weather and work. Jacob sat on the kitchen floor with his bear, watching intently, and when the water finally stilled, he clapped as if witnessing magic. Sarah laughed then, a sound that surprised her with its sincerity, and in that laughter, she felt something shift. They did not become close in the way stories often promise. There were no dramatic confessions, no sudden transformations. But sometimes Michael checked in after a hard week, and sometimes Hannah invited her to church on Sundays where hymns spoke of mercy and mending. Sometimes Jacob ran to her in the parking lot, announcing proudly that his daddy fixed another broken thing, and she would nod, thinking of all the quiet repairs happening where no one could see. Grief did not leave her. It never truly does. But it learned to sit beside her instead of inside her, learned to share space with memory and hope. She began to volunteer at the school library, to walk in the evenings, to let sunlight reach the rooms she once kept dark. Slowly, gently, she remembered how to live without forgetting how to love. Years later, when Jacob stood taller and no longer carried the bear, Sarah would tell him how he once saved a stranger with a sentence he barely remembered. He would smile, unsure what she meant, already busy with the next broken thing he hoped to fix. And if you find yourself one day sitting alone with tears you cannot stop, wondering how the world kept moving when yours fell apart, remember that healing sometimes arrives in small hands and simple words, in places you never planned to be. Ask yourself what you would do if kindness walked up to you without knocking, and whether you would have the courage to let it stay. Before this story ends, share in the comments the moment when a stranger's kindness changed something inside you. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe, and carry its hope with you wherever life feels a little broken.